So let me start. Let me welcome all of you to this training session or workshop on the basic law of budgeting. We have in the past made available to town officials the ability to attend the September workshop that is generally put on by the New Hampshire Municipal Association, but it's in Concord, it's during the day. I think it's difficult for people to get to. So during one of my conversations with attorney Stephen Buckley, who was one of Attorney Burns' colleagues, he mentioned that we could have them come and do this for us. So that's what we have tonight. We have attorney Margaret Burns, who's here from the New Hampshire Municipal Association, and we have invited to join her in this those of us who are involved in the budgeting process, and I think we have another person. Oh, good, excellent, Paul, very good. So we are all sitting around this table. As far as I can see, we are either trustees, select board members, official budget committee members, and the like. So let's.
Sorry to interrupt the whole thing.
That's all right. Nice to see you, Paul.
Thanks.
All right. So let's start by introducing ourselves. So Margaret has some idea of the role that we might play. So I'm Suzanne Heward. I'm chair of the select board.
I'm Denise Knowles, and I'm on the select board.
Michelle Small, Budget Committee.
Bill Irving, Vice Chair of the Budget Committee.
You're up, Ed.
Ed Jansen, Budget Committee.
Bob Ducharme, Police Chief.
Cameron Nichikowski, Library Trustee.
Paul Cass, Budget Committee.
John Ordway, Chairman of the Budget Committee.
Caroline Kendall, Administrative Assistant and Bookkeeper.
Judge Gilmet, Road Agent.
Mark Kuchar, Cemetery Trustee.
Very good. All right.
So Margaret, you
Turn
are on, and
Excellent.
thank you for being here. Before
Yes.
we start, let me say something else too about the New Hampshire Municipal Association. Margaret and her colleague Stephen Buckley, these two wonderful attorneys and the attorneys who preceded them, have provided our town with invaluable assistance throughout the years, and I'm sure Ed Jansen will attest to that as well. And I think you even served on the board, did you not, of the Municipal Association for quite a while?
Only 29 years.
There you
Oh,
go,
wow.
only 29 years. So the Municipal Association is a wonderful resource for the town of Rollinsford, and particularly the Legal Inquiries Department, which is what Attorney Burns and Attorney Buckley provide for us. So Margaret, you're on.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here on this hot and beautiful night. Suzanne mentioned the budgeting workshop that we do in the fall, and as she mentioned, that is an all-day workshop, and it does take place during a work day, so that can be difficult for people who are not, who are not employees of the town and are instead, elected officials who work during the day and do their responsibilities in the evening. It can be difficult for them to make it here. The presentation that I'm doing tonight, Basic Law of Budgeting, is based in substantial part on what we do at that workshop. So the morning portion of that workshop is the Basic Law of Budgeting, where we go over the laws relative to budgeting, and we give basically an overview of all the laws relevant to that. So you should be getting a slightly condensed version, but still the same content of the basic overview that we give at our budgeting workshops in the fall. I have also learned that you have made the transition to SB2, so this will be your first SB2 year, and I will try to touch on that, and if for some reason I forget to touch on it, just prompt me to do so. The final point that I want to make is that as we go through the presentation, if you have questions to clarify the law or what I'm talking about, please just ask your question. Feel free to engage and make this a conversation. But if you have more specific questions about particular factual situations in town or something that's happened and you want an idea about what the best course of action is or whether it was done properly, I would ask that we do that separately from the presentation, and that the questions just be sort of more general in nature. And I think that will also benefit the individuals who may watch this after the fact. So just to give you an idea here, when I talk about the Basic Law of Budgeting, this book is basically in major part what I've based the presentation off of, and this is the book that we update each year for the budget workshops in the fall. So again, I'm going to try to do an overview of basically the entire budget law, and so that you have a really good idea of sort of start to finish why you're supposed to do the things that you are supposed to do, because for the most part there is a law that tells you have to do it a certain way. So we start with a really basic concept, which a lot of you have probably heard, or if you're new to municipal law and the municipal realm, you may not have heard this concept before. So we start with telling municipal officials and municipal employees that New Hampshire does not have home rule. And essentially what that means is that in New Hampshire, municipalities need to have a law from the state, either through the state legislature, so a state statute, or coming from the New Hampshire Supreme Court that gives municipalities the authority to act. In other words, all of our authority as municipalities and political subdivisions is derived from the state saying, okay, municipality, here's what you're allowed to do and here's how you do it. And so when we are thinking about, can we pass a certain ordinance? Can we spend money for a particular purpose? We are always starting with the question of, is there a state law that gives us the authority to act in the first instance? And this statute that you see cited up here, 31 Section 4, is essentially a statute that says that when the municipality has a power to act in a particular area, they also have the ability to spend taxpayer money in that particular area. So municipalities are required to maintain roads. They're allowed to have utilities. They're allowed to have transfer stations. So if there's a statute that says you can have a transfer station, it means that you impliedly, as a municipality, also have the authority to spend money for that purpose. And that's important because sometimes we do get into issues where, are we allowed to spend taxpayer money on a particular purpose? And so our starting point is always, do we have the authority to act in this particular area? Also important to this concept of no home rule is that when you are thinking about municipal law and municipal authority to act, sometimes it's tempting to say, well, there's no statute that says we can't do this, so it must mean that we as a municipality can do it. But it's literally the exact opposite. You have to look for what's usually referred to as enabling legislation or an enabling law that says a municipality can do things. And there are so many examples. You know, I gave road maintenance, I gave transfer stations. Well, there's a statute that gives you authority to have zoning ordinances. There's a statute that mandates you to have welfare. So all of these things that we do are derived in the first instance from a state law. And again, that's important because that's how we know whether, if we have authority to act, that's how we know we also have authority to spend municipal money. And what I generally mean by that is taxpayer money, although it can also come in other forms like grant money or private donations or other money that comes to the municipality. So it's important to sort of start as a baseline when thinking about budgeting. Yeah.
So even if we get grant money, we are still only allowed to spend that grant money for purposes that the state allows us to spend money on.
Correct. So you get grant money, you can't just spend it for some private person or for some private benefit. You still have to act within your municipal authority to fix a bridge, to fix a road, to do a project. You still only have a certain amount of authority, which is always to act with a public purpose, you know, because you're a political subdivision. The same thing goes for private donations. So someone privately, you know, makes a donation of money and wants the municipality to spend it on a purpose that towns can't spend money, or wants the municipality to spend it in a discriminatory fashion, which they're not entitled to do. There's an old case where someone made a private donation, and I believe the money was something to do with education for, I think it was for Protestant boys. And that was a discriminatory purpose, and governments can't engage in that. And so they weren't able to accept that grant money with those strings attached to it and to spend it for a purpose that would otherwise be discriminatory. Good question. So in the same vein of, is there a municipal authority to act? Is there a statute that gives us the authority to act and therefore the authority to spend money? When we are reading those statutes, we also need to be conscious of a few really important terms that will come up, especially in the budget statutes. So when you read a statute and it says that the legislative body has the authority to do something, for example, a statute will say the legislative body has the authority to appropriate money, and we'll get to what that means in a second. But if the statute says the legislative body has the authority to appropriate money, that means the voters. So whenever you see the term legislative body, you're thinking the voters, the people who vote at, you know, who come to the deliberative session and ultimately vote by ballot now that you are an SB2 municipality. And sometimes you'll read a statute that instead of using the term legislative body, it will use just simply the word town, or perhaps just simply the word municipality. But generally when you see those types of words, that means voters and not the governing body on its own initiative. So that's really important, especially in the context of passing ordinances. If it says the legislative body or the town can pass a noise ordinance, that means the voters have to vote on that question in order to pass that ordinance. When you read a statute and it says governing body, you're thinking select board in the town of Rollinsford. That would be your select board. And so there are instances, of course, where the select board has authority to act and not the legislative body. For example, something else we'll talk about today, it is the select board who has the authority to expend money once it's been appropriated by the legislative body. And so you have to be conscious of the fact that some statutes require legislative action and some statutes allow the governing body to take on a particular responsibility or put a particular duty on the governing body as opposed to the legislative body. And finally, of course, there is the budget committee. And when in the context of budgeting, when we talk about the budget committee, we're talking about an official budget committee, which Rollinsford has. Some towns have advisory committees that don't have the same statutory authority and responsibility, but you as a town have an official budget committee, and so all the authority of a budget committee by law that we'll be talking about today is vested in your official budget committee. The statutes that the statute we'll primarily be talking about today is Chapter 32. That's the municipal budget law. And for any of you who are really new to New Hampshire law, when you see RSA, all that means is those are the state statutes here in New Hampshire. They stand for the Revised Statutes Annotated. So we say RSA this and RSA that, and we're just referring to the state law passed by the New Hampshire State Legislature. So most of what you need is found in Chapter 32. But as a new SB2 town, you also must be very conscious of another statute, which is not up here, and that is 40:13. That's 40:13. That is the statute that slightly modifies some of the sort of procedural aspects of the budgeting process for SB2 municipalities. Most specifically, 4013 has very specific deadlines for budgeting purposes for SB2 municipalities, because now you're going to have a deliberative session much earlier in the year than your traditional town meeting was. So we'll circle back to 40 section 13, but it used to be that you could just look at 32. Now 4013 has to become part of your process for understanding whether you are following the municipal budget law correctly. We're not going to talk a lot of really touch upon bonds here today, but I put Chapter 33 up here because this is the statute that allows municipalities to go into long-term debt and to take out, to get bonds in order to fund large projects. So that's just another statute to be aware of in the budgeting process. And we will hopefully, if we have time and if I haven't talked too much, get to Chapter 35, which is the statute that regulates capital reserve funds, which is essentially a way of putting aside and saving money for big capital projects in the municipality. And it's an important statute with a lot of really important rules. Not to get all doom and gloom, but other than the fact that we want to follow the law because we are supposed to follow the law, there can also be other consequences that occur if we don't do things procedurally correct under the municipal budget law, Chapter 32. In fact, a municipal official can be removed from office for violating budget law. So, that is something important to keep in mind. I'm only aware of one case where it in fact did occur. It's an old case, but we are all, as municipal officials, all of us here involved somehow with the budget process, and therefore it's incumbent on us to remember that we're all required to follow the budget law. And so, think about that as we go through these statutes, that it really falls upon all of us to fulfill these responsibilities under the statute. Other than that, since I don't see this happening very often, and I certainly don't see municipal officials intentionally violating budget law very often, the really problematic thing is that usually these violations occur because something was forgotten procedurally. They forgot a hearing, they didn't notice it correctly, they didn't draft the warrant article correctly. Some little procedural, kink in the process occurred, and for that reason, the money that you thought you got through the budgeting process is not actually yours, because a huge part of municipal budget law is following the steps in the law that get us to the part where we appropriate the money. And so one of the things that can happen when we don't follow the procedural requirements of the statutes correctly is that the Department of Revenue, which is DRA, the Department of Revenue, who has the unenviable task of reading all of your minutes from all of your town meetings after they occur, will actually disallow appropriations that violate the budget law, meaning they will say, yes, I know you thought you put this money into the capital reserve fund, but you didn't do it right, so you don't get it. And that's the most typical consequence that we see towns fall into. A couple of years ago, there was a town that thought they had put money aside into a capital reserve fund to buy a much needed, it was either an ambulance or a fire truck, and they had not done the warrant article correctly, and DRA said, no, this is not correct, you didn't appropriate this money correctly. And so that was obviously for them a huge problem, because they needed an ambulance or a fire truck, whatever it was, and they did not have the money. Now, there are ways to cure defects after the fact. When you have done something improper, you can have, we won't get into detail on this, but there are ways to have a special meeting after the fact to cure a defect that happened. There are ways to ask the Department of Revenue for permission to spend money even where you don't have it. And so there are ways to clean it up, but we're trying to follow the process correctly from the beginning in order to avoid getting that notice from the Department of Revenue that you thought you had the money, but you don't have the money because a step was missed.
So as inelegant as the DRA's tax portal is, this is a new automated system that has arisen over the last 2 or 3 years. And so what we have done is we put our, I don't know if we have to, I don't remember that, but we put our warrants right in the tax portal, and our person, who is Michelle Clark, looks them over and says, you need to change this language to that. So she has, over the years, helped us perfect our warrant articles so that we don't fall into what you just said.
So as Suzanne points out, there's now a new online portal where you submit basically all of your warrant articles to DRA electronically, and they have this great service where they will do pre-review of warrant articles to determine whether they're correct. Now, I know I'm being recorded, but I'm going to say this anyways. Just because DRA has reviewed your warrant articles and just because they've said something is correct or not correct, please also have a lawyer review your warrant articles. They are excellent auditors and advisors, but they also review a lot of warrant articles. One person has a very large area of the municipality, and it is important to have the review of an attorney as well.
So our town council is
Also
what you're
reviews
suggesting.
yes, I am.
That's good for us to remember.
Yes, I am suggesting that you have both.
Thank you.
So in the context, as we talk about the municipal budget law, one of the big questions is, well, what is the official budget committee's responsibilities in the context of budgeting? And in towns like Rollinsford with an official budget committee, they really take on the operating budget process, and they take on the hearing process, and it's their responsibility to put the proposed budget to the voters, the budget that the voters will consider, amend, and eventually adopt or not adopt, as the case may be. So the budget committee's responsibilities, even though they feel like they start in so-called budget season, sort of in the fall or the late fall when the budget is starting to go together, one of the responsibilities and authority that the budget committee does have is the authority to review current year's expenditures. And that includes not just sort of at the beginning of budget season, but the budget committee has the ability to sort of routinely throughout the year look at what has been appropriated, how did we plan this out, how did we conceptualize the way that we would break down the operating budget, and how are the expenditures that we're actually making lining up with the way that we budgeted. And so while the budget committee does not have any authority to, demand that certain expenditures be made or not made, they do have the responsibility to review expenditures throughout the year as a way of thinking about budgeting for next year, so that we're looking at, okay, we thought we needed this, but we actually spent this, and so how can we use that information to help us in the budgeting process next year? So reviewing expenditures throughout the year is an important sort of step in understanding whether the budget has been sort of conceived properly, or there might be different things to take into account when it comes time to put together next year's budget.
So just as a point of information, several years back, I actually think it was Mike Rollo, when he was chair of the budget committee.
Okay.
He started a quarterly review. So the budget committee meets
Oh,
quarterly.
good. Okay.
Meets to look at first quarter, second quarter, third quarter. Fourth quarter is then, at that point, you're doing next year's budget. But so
I think, I think having quarterly meetings to review the budget and not have this all wait until the very beginning of budget season is really crucial. And I'm not sure that all budget committees do that, or perhaps are not aware that that's sort of part of their responsibility. So to hear that you're doing it is extremely helpful for the budgeting process.
there's this delicate balance.
Yes.
Of course, when we're doing this, that sometimes budget committee members want to say, well, why did you spend all that money
Sure.
on this, and so there's this, are they trying to usurp a governance? Or are they just trying to find out so that we could provide a better budgeting next year? So that's a kind of like a legitimate source of some back and forthness.
And if there is only a small amount of contention on that point, I think you should count yourselves lucky, because not all towns fare as well in the conflict between the select board and the budget committee. So as you'll see, I put in the bullet point in bold here on the bottom that the budget committee does not control spending. And this is a really important point, because as you point out, there is, budget committee responsibility and select board responsibility. And at some point they can bump up against, each other a little bit. But sort of as black and white as I can say it, understanding that there is always some level of gray area, is that the budget committee's responsibility is to propose a budget to the voters that the budget committee believes responsibly and accurately resembles the needs of the municipality for the budget year. But what the budget committee does not have any authority to do is control the expenditures, and expending the budget is vested entirely in the select board. Yes.
One of your items there says, prepare the budget.
Yep.
Now, preparing the budget from scratch is a huge undertaking. What we've done here is the select board prepares the budget,
Yes.
basically, brings it to the budget committee for review, and we discuss and slice and dice and do so. When you say prepare, I envision that's something the select board doesn't do, but we should be doing as a budget committee, which to me is a whole ton of work, and really I don't think what any of us on the budget committee considered was part of the job. So what's the difference there?
Prepare is the word that the statute uses for your
Right.
responsibility, but the statutes also contemplate exactly the process that you just described would occur. So the governing body still has the responsibility to, talk to department heads, review the needs, and the governing body still has the responsibility to propose a budget. You guys have to come up with what you think is the correct budget for the municipality. And in towns without an official budget committee, that would be it. The governing body would come up with the proposed budget, hold the budget hearings, and that would be the budget that goes to the voters. But with the official budget committee, now you've got basically another layer that comes in. And once the governing body has done its portion by saying, look, we've reviewed the needs of the town and this is our proposed budget, now the budget committee takes it and it becomes the budget committee's responsibility to review it, change it, amend it, and also becomes the budget committee's responsibility and authority to request, and that's where I have review proposals up here, which is they can also talk to department heads. So just because the governing body feels that they understand the needs of the police chief and the police department doesn't mean that the budget committee is now barred from asking for more information from the police department. And so your process is perfectly in line with what is contemplated.
And we do that. We have the
Yep.
department heads come before the budget committee and they present and we go through that. So we're on.
You
the
are
right track.
on, you are totally on par here.
When you say they don't have control of spending, we are a bottom line authority
Mhm.
as a town officials, have the bottom line authority of a budget. So that also means that they don't have the right to tell us how we can and cannot spend our money within the budget lines,
Correct.
correct? They can't,
Correct.
right?
So
Thank you.
think of it this way, and it's not, again, it's not always perfectly clear, but this is the way I conceptualize the budget. You have a form from the Department of Revenue. It has a bottom line figure. What was this year's budget approximately? What are we at?
Maybe 2 million something.
2 million. So you've got $2 million is your bottom line budget. The budget form is broken down into parts, and they're what I like to call big line items because they represent huge chunks of the municipal budget and they equal up to the $2 million bottom line budget. The budget committee, first the select board in preparing its draft budget, and then the budget committee in preparing the final budget that goes to the voters, is certainly going to complete that budget form and sort of break down those line items, public works, police department, however they're broken down, and put in figures into each one of those line items. But ultimately, when the voters vote on the budget and they adopt that $2 million budget, they're not adopting the budget within those line items, they're adopting a bottom line figure. And so the budget committee prepares a budget that goes to the voters. It's kind of this process where it's budget committee prepares budget, voters adopt it, and then select board spends it. And the responsibility to spend within that bottom line is upon the select board. And really all they're constricted by is the bottom line figure. And of course also their responsibility, if they are moving money around during the year, their responsibility to do it in a way that's responsible so that they can actually meet the needs of the town, and also to do it in a way that's transparent, because the statute also requires that when you do move money around, you keep you keep documentation that shows how you've moved it, where it came from, and where it went to, so that the public has the ability to go in and say, okay, so highway department got $500,000, but highway department spent $700,000. So did the select board overspend our bottom line? No, they took $200,000 from these other places within the budget. And as long as both the public and the budget committee has the ability to resolve that and to see why lines were over or underspent, then you're in keeping with your responsibility.
So what we have done over the last couple of years, just in order to help the select board
Yep.
have better control over our spending, is that we will actually, we have our original budget,
Yep.
and then we have a revised budget. So we can see when we've had to add money to salt for roads, or had to add money to whatever for
Yes.
something unusual. But it's so much better to have that column so that we now know what the new bottom line is for that particular category, and we've got the right bottom line here, because if we added 50,000 there, it's because we took a total of 50,000 from other lines.
Absolutely, and for the purpose of budgeting next year, you may say, well, for the past 3 years, we've way under budgeted highway and we've way over budgeted these other departments. And so let's start getting our budget in line with what we're actually spending throughout the year. And so that's a really important reason for record keeping, other than the responsibility for transparency.
I have one other
Yeah.
question, if I may, that's been a source of confusion, excuse me, and that is that, can you hear me?
No, I was in Bill's way.
So that, we understand that the select board has sort of, bottom line. As long as we stay within our bottom line and are acting responsibly in serving the public needs as they arise during the year, we're okay. But when we propose a budget to the to the board, and the town sees it, because the DRA form has, you know, the select board proposal, proposed budget amount, and the official budget committee's proposed amounts. So it looks like they do have some line item control in the budget, so that's just, so.
They have, the only control they have, and I wouldn't use the word control, is just that when you don't just propose a bottom line budget and say, Rollinsford, we propose $2 million. You, as the budget committee, have a responsibility to try to explain and show the way that you have come up with that budget, which is to allocate it among the various municipal departments that are shown on the budget form. But that's not a control that says this is the way we have to spend the money. It's simply a way of showing the voters how we have allocated and how we anticipate we will in fact spend that $2 million bottom line budget. But again, your desire is not for that allocation to be totally out of whack, to the extent that you can sort of anticipate the needs correctly and budget consistently. But it is not a control of the line items, because the authority to spend money is in the select board.
I have a follow-up if I may. So let's say the board proposes, the select board, $2 million, and the budget committee says, we're just gonna lock 10% off. But they can't just do that. They have to, don't they have to say?
Yes, I mean.
They have to.
Yes, and there actually was a New Hampshire Supreme Court case, I guess it's been a couple of years now, that dealt with a budget committee that, I think it was a school budget, that dealt with a budget committee that simply cut a certain amount off and didn't really specify where it was coming from. I think they said, you know, certain amount from general programs and a certain amount from special programs, and I don't know enough about schools, but apparently there are general programs and special programs. And so they didn't really clearly specify, and you know, they tried to, I think it was the school district tried to say that this was sort of just an arbitrary cut that they weren't permitted to do. And in that case, it was not the greatest thing that they did, and the court would have preferred that they really specify where the cuts were coming from, but it wasn't wrong to do it that way. But certainly it's going to create confusion. And so if the budget committee gets the select board's budget and says, you know, we think you're about $500,000 too much on this budget, it really, for the purpose of educating the voters, for having a workable budget, for letting the select board know what they think was not calculated correctly, it really should come from certain parts of the budget so that it adds up to the total bottom line budget and we can see what happened here. Because not doing it that way only leads to more voter confusion about, I think, what they're adopting in the budget. Keep in mind too that, you know, when we talk about line items, we're really generally talking about those sort of overarching line items that are found in the Department of Revenue form, which again, the big line items.
Yes.
But every municipality, as far as I know, also has a more detailed chart of accounts where they really break down every single department and, you know, into the nitty-gritty of what's being spent on what. But really, in the legal concept is usually we're talking about the big line items.
The DRA's chart of
exactly.
accounts.
But for the purpose of transparency and record keeping and budgeting, if you're keeping track in your more detailed chart of accounts, that is certainly better for you. But what the budget committee deals with is the Department of Revenue form and that breakdown of the budget as well as the bottom line budget. Okay, the chart of accounts is really more of a bookkeeping way of dealing with expenditures throughout the year.
So would you say then, as we get into the actual budgeting season, that we provide the official budget committee with that DRA form as well as the details, because we're always giving them
Absolutely.
the detail at our quarterly reviews and stuff.
There's no reason why you don't provide, you know, the utmost ability